Okay, we'll continue on our self-forgiveness for the male ego. To assist me in my separation from my husband, as me, as you, as all life. So as I'm assisting me, I'm assisting you and everyone else. So in the same situation, I found this list, self-forgiveness list from Destiny, www.destiny.co.za. The other lists before this have worked for me and in overcoming the emotions and stuff. So plus the breathing. So I'm sharing this with you. Okay, so it says, I forgive myself to have allowed myself to use the ego of the mind in becoming this, to attempt and try to control a certain specific situation or event or circumstance. I forgive myself that I haven't allowed myself to realize that I derive power from the ego of the mind to have control of a situation, to have it go my way. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to believe that in becoming the ego of the mind, I am one of the guys. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to believe that in becoming the ego of the mind, I will attract woman, and in my case, man, because there's a male ego. I'm a woman, so I'll change the woman to man. I will attract man. Okay. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to become the ego of the mind to fit in with society of man. So if you're a man, say men, but if you're a woman, say women. So I'll say to fit in with society of women. Because to be a man or woman, you must have an ego. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to establish myself as the ego of the mind within and of this world, because I believed and thought that for a man or woman to be a man or woman in this world, especially to survive, the man or woman need an ego to protect himself with. I forgive myself that I haven't allowed myself to realize that I'm too shit scared of self-intimacy and being intimate with another, that I become the ego of the mind, to not experience myself in any way whatsoever, but to be a man or a woman defined within and of this world, the unified consciousness field. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to use the ego of the mind to ensure that no one and nothing can hurt me in any way whatsoever, not emotionally or even to feel in any way whatsoever. I forgive myself that I have allowed myself to believe that having an ego is being strong and powerful, a man or a woman. I forgive myself that I have allowed myself to believe that when I am the ego of the mind, I have control and power over, within and of my world and everyone and everything in it. And nothing can or may influence or change anything without my permission as the ego of the mind. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to become the ego of the mind through fear of spinning out of control and not knowing what to do. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to become the ego of the mind because the ego of the mind apparently always knows what to do. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to fear being without the ego of the mind through fear of losing me and being labeled as a wimp or chicken shit if I do not act, react, respond within and as the ego of the mind. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to believe that I am not the ego of the mind. I am in fear that if I am not the ego of the mind, I am inferior, chicken shit, a wimp, a loser, a nothing, a nerd. I forgive myself that I haven't allowed myself to realize that superiority cannot exist without inferiority. To stop the ego, I must realize that both polarities of the mind as inferiority and superiority are illusionary manifestations of the mind. I have denied as who I am. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to just want to be one of the guys. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to become the ego of the mind to be accepted and noticed by others and woman, because I haven't accepted myself as who I am. as the breath of life. I forgive myself that I haven't allowed myself to realize that impatience is a trait of the ego of the mind, because the ego of the mind wants it and it wants it now. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to believe that women like and want a man with an ego, a massive ego. I'll say that again. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to believe that woman or man like and want a man or woman with an ego, a massive ego who is presenting a deceptive presentation of superiority, oozing confidence and certainty. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to become the ego of the mind to attract woman or man for sexual pleasure. I forgive myself that I've allowed myself to define the ego of the mind as confidence, because I haven't accepted confidence as me, as who I am. Okay, this is the end of the self-forgiveness for the male ego. I will share with you another self-forgiveness list very soon.